My name is Laura Hope. I'm a mixed media figurative artist working on narrative pieces, usually inspired by memory. My background is predominantly in illustration. I studied illustration at university because I didn't really feel that I could go and do fine art. I felt too scared by the fine art world, so I went and did illustration. And sort of was drifting into larger scale fine art pieces by the time I left. Had some work placements at some scenic art places, painting kind of backgrounds and interiors for plays and operas, but actually ended up getting a job with a memorial company, hand etching artwork on gravestones, mostly portraits, but some scenery. And I think this probably has now shaped how I make work in a slightly more etching, layered, mechanical way because of how I think I was trained there. I worked for 3 years and I got full training. And I think that kind of methodical way of working somehow comes out in my work now. So after working for the memorial company, I ended up leaving and working as a freelance illustrator, mostly in the event space. So doing a lot of live portraits at events. So both working at the Gravestone Company and doing live portraits both kind of honed my skill for likeness and capturing expression and capturing someone's personality. But I didn't really feel fulfilled in either of those jobs in terms of making work that felt really true to me. So it was during lockdown that a lot of my event work just went out the window, and it was quite a scary time. But also it gave me the opportunity to start exploring my own work, which has been evolving over the last few years. I've kind of built up a visual language that I'm sort of more happy with, that involves this kind of usually a red, kind of predominantly sort of like red, slightly sepia toned work that is mostly drawn but is sort of mixed media with kind of oil pastels, sort of a muted colour palette. I've sort of found a visual language that I'm happy with, and now I'm sort of working to let out what I want to say with my work. So this comes back to your question, which was what was your background. So that was what was my background in terms of art, but what was my background in terms of me as a person. So I grew up abroad. I actually grew up in Prague in the Czech Republic, and that shaped most of my childhood, and that feels mostly like home. But it's a strange situation when you grow up abroad, but I'm not Czech, my parents are English, because it sort of feels like home, but it also doesn't, and you sort of have this strange sense of not belonging all the time. And I also grew up in a Christian home, but from a young age didn't feel any connection to a kind of Christianity and religion. And so grappled a lot with that, sort of feeling like I didn't belong, I couldn't fit in, and grappling with the guilt of kind of not being a Christian, I suppose. And so that background, those kind of themes of not belonging, of kind of having all of these, I suppose, unique experiences that surround me. Sort of I think a lot of my creativity is inspired by kind of Czech architecture and the kind of Art Nouveau, the kind of Alphonse Mucha paintings I was surrounded with as a child, and the kind of vintage architecture of the buildings that is sort of stayed with me. And so I'm very inspired by that, and then also spending a lot of time in churches, I think, and sort of being around those religious stories. I think all of those themes are now in my work, and they're things that I am looking at exploring more. So that's a more detailed explanation of my background. So my biggest influences, you've asked what my biggest influences are. So I suppose obviously the things I mentioned before about vintage architecture, but in terms of art and painting, my biggest influence is Paula Rego. I absolutely love her work, her figurative work that is more realistic than a lot of figurative painters, but so narrative, so full of emotion, so raw. I absolutely love her work. Then other painters that I'm inspired by, I absolutely love Andrew Wyeth. Very realistic painter, but again has lots of narrative within his work. Love Henry Toulouse-Lautrec. Again, his paintings are slightly illustrative, but so full of storytelling and people interactions. And just purely from an aesthetic point of view, I love Ewan Uglow's paintings, but don't find as much narrative or as much inspiration in that way from them. So painting wise, I would say those are my biggest influences. And then obviously Alphonse Mucha that I mentioned, from growing up in the Czech Republic, his very illustrative way of painting, I think, plays into how I make work as well. So what am I focusing on right now? So at the moment, it's been quite a crazy year. I had a big illustration project from the Folio Society where I was commissioned to do illustrations for a new Agatha Christie novel. And while it was a dream kind of commission in terms of illustration, it's actually been quite interesting because it's helped me move forward narratively in my work and think about how I captured narrative with that, and then how I can now capture my own stories within my more personal work. So I'm sort of in an exploratory phase at the moment, trying to gather everything, really think about what I want to say with my work. I'm sort of happy with, I think, how my work looks to an extent. Obviously, as an artist, you're never happy. But I'm sort of confident-ish in the way that I'm working. So now it's really thinking about, things are coming out, but it's trying to think about what they're trying to say, and learn from those. So next year, for the next few months really, it's going to be a lot of looking back at old work, looking at my influences, and really trying to think about what I'm trying to say with my work. Biggest challenges of being an artist are one, having a creative brain, which is just really noisy and really loud and just is going 10 to the dozen, always thinking of things, always wanting to do things, always wanting to crack on, always wanting to try new things. And two, never being happy with anything. So always, I mean, for me, I'm a huge perfectionist. So I'm always feeling like I'm not quite there. I haven't quite got it. I'm not quite happy with what I've produced, or sometimes never happy with what I'm produced. I think it's a constant moving forward, which can be exciting. Like, your life is not dull, but it also doesn't stop. And it's hard to take that break and take that step back, and let everything sink in that's happened, and, you know, celebrate your wins and all the things that you should be doing. I think we just push forward as artists. So that's probably the biggest challenge. My advice to my younger self would be just to keep going. and just understand that, like, the winding path, you know, is all part of the journey. Like, sometimes I think, I should have studied fine art at university and I shouldn't have studied illustration. But then when I look at my work, all of the things that I learned through illustration and all of the things that I learned through my job as a memorial artist, they all inform the work I'm doing now. So in a way, I wouldn't have changed anything, but I think it's hard to see that at the time. And sometimes things just don't make sense while you're doing them, jobs that you do, or, you know, situations that you're in, or artwork that you make doesn't make sense at the time, but then a few years later you see something in it. So it's that patience, but also persistence, moving forward, but also giving yourself a break. I think that would probably be my tips for my younger self. My whole process really is sort of unconventional with mediums and techniques, because I haven't had any formal training as an artist apart from my degree in illustration. But in terms of art materials, I've never really had any formal training. So I sort of figure things out as I go along. I, use a method of, I gesso my boards and my paper, and then I use a mixture of, gouache, because I use this kind of acrylic gouache, which you can go over with pencils and with wax crayons and pastels, because it's sort of acrylic-y, so it dries quickly. It's not like oil, but it's not like acrylic because it doesn't have a shiny surface. And then I mix, oil pastels, with pencils, and everything I do is, I layer sort of wax pastels over my gouache, and, I haven't really learned any of it. It's just things that I've come across and sort of figured out as I've been along. So yeah, I don't know of anyone working in the mixture that I use. So I suppose it is sort of unconventional in a way. A mixture of everything is probably pretty unconventional. I tend to listen to podcasts while I'm working. Long form art podcasts are my favourite, conversation-wise. Sometimes, depending on what mood I'm in or depending on what stage of the work I'm in, if I'm very much in a stage of kind of figuring it out or doing compositional sketches or trying to work out something, then sometimes I will need complete silence. But otherwise, a good long-form conversation podcast is the best thing for me, because it sort of occupies part of my brain so the other part of me can really get into the flow of making what I'm making. The best reaction someone has had to my artwork. Any reaction is the best reaction, to be honest. When I've won some awards, been shortlisted for things, that always feels like an amazing reaction, that people think that it's good enough to, be selected for something or win something. But, any of the comments that I receive, when people say that it's moved them, or, they've seen something in it, that means so much to me. That's the best reaction, just that someone has had a reaction to it. It just, it ceases to amaze me that people, have a reaction to my work. It never ceases to amaze me. What do I hope people take away from my artwork? Similar to the question before, really, about reactions, for me, when I go to an art gallery or when I view artwork that hits me right in the base of my stomach, and I maybe can't explain why it does it, but it's hit me in the base of my stomach and I just can't stop staring at it, and I just want to be around it, and I just love it, and I can't explain why. If someone has that reaction to my work, that kind of gut reaction when it moves them and they love it, or you know, or maybe they can't look at it because it's hard, or, you know, whatever. Like, those gut reactions, you know, that's always, you know, they mean so much to me when I look at a piece of artwork and have that reaction, because usually it makes me just want to get back into the studio, you know, and an artist has given me that. They've given me that push through me seeing their work. I mean, I can only hope that I could do that for someone else, that someone else could look at my work and it hits them in the gut and they think, oh, I've just got to make something. Yeah, that's what I hope people take away.